Specflow tutorial part 8 context injection. In part 7 we have learned about hooks. So in this session we are going to learn about what is a context injection, why do we use a context injection, steps and rules to implement a context injection. So let me start this session. Specflow supports a very simple dependency framework that is able to instantiate and inject a class instance for a scenario, and this is known as a context injection. So in this specific definition we need to understand first what is a dependency. So when we guys are talking about a dependency, take an example of here we have a class event, and inside the class event we are creating the object of the user class inside the constructor of this event class. Here we are using a new operator to create the object of the user class. So it means this event class is dependent on the object of this user class. So this user object is a dependency for this event class. So when we guys are talking about this definition, Specflow supports a very simple dependency framework that is able to instantiate and inject a class instance for the scenarios. Here we can see this event class is creating the object of the user class, and if you talk about the definition of the dependency framework, this is saying that is able to instantiate and inject a class instance for the scenario. It means as per the definition of this dependency framework, we don't need to create the object of the user class within the event class. If the event class needs the object of the user class, then the dependency framework is going to create the object outside this event class, and it is going to inject that particular object in the constructor of the class. Right now we can see we have this event class, and this event class is having a constructor. We call it as an event constructor, and inside the event constructor parameters we have the name of the class. It means whenever the dependency framework, this dependency framework which is supported by the Specflow, see the class name as a parameter in any of the constructor, automatically this dependency framework is going to create the object outside, and it is going to inject that particular object in this parameter of this constructor. This is known as a dependency injection. Dependency injection is another type of the design pattern, and if we talk about a dependency injection is nothing but a design pattern. We use a design pattern to create our automation framework or to create applications to more robust and a more usable or reusable components we want to create it in the applications in the automation frameworks. Then we use a design patterns in any of the application in any of the automation framework. Let me flip to Visual Studio to understand with an example. We have a Specflow session project, and this Specflow session project we have created in the previous sessions. In this Specflow session project we have a few dependencies, we have a package, we have a Specflow and unit packages, and these packages help to execute and write the test cases related to a Specflow. And in this Specflow session we have one class, we call it as an event.cs class, and another we have a feature file, we call it as an event registration.feature file. And in this event registration feature file, just to speed up the process, I have already written a one scenario. It is saying register event with valid information, and we are accepting an input from the users in the form of the first name and the last name. All these steps have a corresponding step definitions. Right click on this, go to definitions, and we can see we have all the corresponding step definitions of the steps which we have mentioned it here. Now we are accepting the input from the users in the form of the first name and the last name. What we want to do is we want to save this information to somewhere, and if we want to save the information, we are going to save the information in one of the class. So let's do one thing. Let's create a class here. Right click, add, we can say class, the name as user. Mark this class as a public. Two variables here, we can say public string. To save the first name we can have a first name, and to save the last name we can have the last name as well. So we have created a class, we call it as a user class, and this user class is having two fields of a string type. One is a first name and another is a last name. So these two fields are going to save the information which we are passing it here while doing the registration. We are going to save the first name and the last name. And if you talk about saving the first name and the last name, we have these step definitions where we guys are accepting the input from the user, or you can say these are the methods which are having the parameters and coming the values from the steps which we have mentioned it here in the event registration.feature files. Now if you talk about saving the information in this users.cs file, what we need to do is we need to create the object of this class. Then we can access these fields, the first name and the last name, and we can save it. We have marked these fields as a public, so that's why we can create the object. We can access these fields in any of the class. So if you want to save the information, what we need to do is we need to create the object. So let's do one thing, let's create object here. To create the object, let's declare a fun constructor here. We can say event, and then now you want to create the constructor. Let's do one thing, let's declare a class level reference variable for this user class, and then we can say user is equal to users. Now we have created the object of this class. We can assign the values. We have the object with us, user dot, and we can assign the values equal to first name, which we are getting it as a parameter. Now we can do it the same way here for the last name as well. So here it is, the last name. So we are assigning the values. We have created the object of this user class inside this event class. This event class is dependent on the object of this user class, because this event class is using the object of this user class to add the information, first name and the last name. In other words, we can say this user class is a dependency for this event class. So right now this event class is creating the object of this user class with the help of this new operator. It means this event class will be completely responsible for the creation of the object of this user class as well as the destruction of this object of this user class. If you see, the main functionality of this event class is to accept the information from the user, but this event class is also trying to create the object of this user class, and it is also responsible for the maintenance of the complete life cycle of the object of this class as well. Can we give this functionality, the creation of the object, or you can say the life cycle maintenance of this object, to some other mechanism? Yes, we can do it with the help of this dependency injection. Dependency injection is another type of the design pattern where we give the task to that particular framework for the creation of the object as well as the destruction of that particular object as well. Whenever and wherever we need the object, we just need to tell the framework we need the object, and automatically the framework is going to inject the object in your class as well. If you talk about the injecting the object, dependency injection inject the object in the constructor of the class. If we need the object of this user class, then what we need to do is we need to add the parameter of the constructor of this class for this user. Automatically dependency injection is going to create the object of this user class and going to inject in the parameter of the constructor of the class. Right now we have this user class and we have this event constructor. If we want the object of this user class, then what we need to do is we can have this as a parameter. So let's have this user, and instead of creating the object by our own, we can use the reference of this parameter which we are passing it. Specflow also provides a limited functionality of the dependency injection. They have their own functionalities related to a dependency injection. Whenever we are using the binding keyword on the top of the class, it means Specflow consider this class. Right now we have added a binding keyword on the top of this event class. It means Specflow is going to consider this event class as a Specflow class, and whenever the Specflow see the parameter which is having a class, it is going to create the object and inject it inside the parameter, or you can say inside the constructor as a parameter. Let's do one thing, let's run this, go to test explorer, and we have a one scenario. This is saying register event with validation information. So let's provide some information. We can say easy automation.com, and the last name can be a meaning website. Let's have a debug point of them. Have a debug point here, this as well as in this I provide a last name. So now let's go here and say debug. Okay, we are getting a control here. So if you hover a mouse, we can see we are getting the object of this user class. Okay, and then we are assigning the parameterized value to this reference variable which we have edited or which we have declared it at the class level. So now this user is also showing it as an object. Now if we click on continue, we have reached it here. So let's put a debug point here, click on continue. If we hover a mouse here, we can see this is the user object, and inside the user object we are getting the value of the first name, which is easyautomationtesting.com. We are not creating the object with the help of the new operator, but with the help of the dependency injection, with the help of the context injection, Specflow already creating the object outside this event class and injecting that particular object in the event class which we have added it here. So if we click on continue again, we have reached it here. Let's have a continue here, and we can see we have this user first name, which is easyautomationtesting.com, and the last name is a training website. So with the help of this context injection, we can create the object and we can fill the information which we require with respect to the object. Whenever you are using a context injection or dependency injection, we have a few of the rules that we need to follow it. With respect to the .NET classes, we need to create a POCO, plain old CLR object, define them as a constructor parameter in every binding class that requires them. And if we see it here, this event class needs the object of this user class. Then we have created the constructor of this event class, and we have added the user class because we need the object of this user class. And we have bind the class, which is this event class, with the keyword of the Specflow, which is a binding, because the Specflow, whenever they see this keyword as a binding keyword, then the Specflow consider a class as a Specflow class. Whenever they see any class as a constructor parameter, they automatically create the object and inject it into the constructor of the class. Then we can assign the parameterized to the reference variable which we have declared it, and we can use it in the step definitions of this particular class as well. So we have a few steps as well as few rules as well. The lifetime of these objects is limited to a scenarios executions. So if we talk about the lifetime of this object which we have created with the help of this dependency injection, with the help of this context injection which we have created in this event class, the life of this object will be the life of this scenario. It means if we have created the object of this user here in this step, then that object will be available in all the steps of this particular scenario. Let's do one thing. Let's create another step here. Then I display user. Let's do one thing. Let's have a generate step definitions, copy methods to clipboard. So instead of adding this step in this event class, we can create another class here. Let's have a class here. We can see class, and this time it's a user information, and then we can mark this as a public. Let's have a constructor here. We can say user information, and then let's have this user. We can say it is the user, and let's declare this user here as well. So if we are able to get it, what we need to do is assign this value to the class level declared object of this user, and then we can paste the step which we have copied from the Specflow drop down. Right now we are getting a syntax error, so let's have a alt enter to import a namespace related to a tech talk Specflow. Let's get rid of this as well. So if you want to display the information, then what we guys can do is we can use this console.writeLine, and we can say first name, what is the value. We can use a concatenation operator, then the object dot, and here is the first name. And then if we talk about the last name, user, and then the last name. So here is the last name. So let's mark this class as a binding class to have the impact of the dependency injection. So we have created a user information class, and this user information class is having a constructor, and as a parameter we are passing the class name, the user, because we need the object of this user class to display the first name and the last name. And we have also marked this user information class with the help of this binding keyword of the Specflow. So whenever the Specflow see the binding keyword on the top of the class, then this user information class will be treated as a Specflow class, and whenever the Specflow see the user class as a parameter in the constructor, automatically it is going to create the object. In this class, what we guys are going to do is we are going to display the information related to a first name and the last name. So here we need to check whether we are getting a new object or we are getting the object reference which we have created it here in this event class. So let's do one thing. Let's go to the test explorer. Before running this scenario, let's have a few more debug points. Go to the user information. We can have a debug point here, as well as we already have the information here in the event registration.feature files. We have the debug point here in the event class as well. So let's have a debug point here. Now let's go to test explorer, right click and a debug. The first control has reached it here. We can hover a mouse here. Right now we are getting the object, first name and the last name, both are the null. So let's click on continue, and it has reached it here. In this step we are assigning the values which we are getting it as a parameterized in this particular step definitions. And then if we click on continue again, we have reached it here. If we hover a mouse on this user, we can see we are getting a value of related to first name and the last name. If we go it here in the registration feature file, we are going to display the information, and this step is not present in the event class. So this step is present inside this user information, and here we have this class as a parameter because this user information needs the object of this user class. Whether the context injection or dependency injection will create a new object, or it is going to provide the reference of the object which we have created it here in this event class. So let's do one thing. Let's have a debug point here as well. Click on continue. We have reached it here, and if we see, we have the first name and the last name, and the first name and the last name we have added it here in this event class. We have created the object, and if we see in this user information class, we are getting the reference of the object which we have created it here in this event class. Dependency injection not creating the new object, it is providing the reference of the object which we have created in the event class. Let's click on continue. Control has reached it here. And if we click on continue scenario, here we are getting all the information. First name easyautomationtesting.com, another is a training website. At the end we can say whatever the object which we are creating it here in this scenario, the scope of that particular object with the help of that dependency injection is throughout the scenario. It means if we are creating the object here in the first line, then that object will be available in the remaining steps of the scenario. The lifetime of the object is limited to a scenario's execution. Resolution is done using public constructors only. If there are multiple public constructors, Specflow takes the first one. If you talk about the additional resources, I have already created one course that is on the Udemy, and that course help you to learn a professional automation framework creation with the C#, Specflow and the Selenium. So that course is going to help us to create an enterprise level automation framework with the different design patterns, builder design pattern, singleton design pattern, a strategy design pattern, and dependency injection design pattern. So this is the one of the most important design pattern where we guys are not creating the object with the help of the new operator. So this dependency injection design pattern helping us to create the object without utilizing a new operator. Another is a IOC design pattern. So these all design patterns helping a automation framework which we have created in this Udemy course, making a more robust and a more reliable as well. So this course help us to build the thought pattern for designing and targeting the framework, and this course also help us to build the capabilities to understand any complex code base. So after completing the course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework. After completing this course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework from the scratch, not with this language but with the other languages as well, because a framework development is not dependent on any of the language. So framework code also uploaded with the course. If you want, you can enroll that particular course on the Udemy. Please subscribe this channel to have the notifications of a new automation related sessions.